By way of introduction, my name is Nancy Cairo, and I am AVPA's Executive Director for the East Africa region. And again, welcome to this session. I'll start this session with the slide just showing us the agenda for today. I'll do the introduction, short introduction on AVPA, especially for those of you who are hearing about us for the first time. Then there'll be a background on the research by, sorry about that, that'll be presented by our Value Hub Director, Rachel Keeler, and key highlights will, which also Rachel will be giving, and then the research findings will be presented by Karnika and another Rachel Wangari from IntelliCap Advisory Services. And then we'll move into what's next, and you'll hear from our CEO, Dr. Frank Aswani, and a question and answer session at the end of our time together. So by way of introduction, again, welcome to the launch of AVPA's first social investment landscape study. The research exercise identified over 820 social investors who are active in East, West, and Southern Africa, but today we'll be highlighting the East Africa regional report. So we're really excited about sharing this with you. For those of you who missed it, we actually launched the entire report last week, and we had a regional launch for the South Africa version of the report. And Thursday, we have a regional webinar launching the regional report for West Africa. But of course, the entire report can be found on our website, www.avpa.africa. So just put in avpa.africa and you can see our newly launched website, and under the Value Hub page, you'll find the full report. So as I said, I'll start by just going over a little bit about what AVPA is about. So the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, AVPA, is a network organization for social investors. And our mission is to increase the flow of capital, whether that's financial, intellectual, or human capital that's deployed to address Africa's pressing social issues. AVPA is here to work with capital providers, such as most of you who are on the call today. And really, we're here to disrupt the space between pure charity and pure business by crowding in catalytic de-risking funds to scale innovative social solutions. Through collaboration, exchange of information, and the use of innovative finance approaches, we believe exponential positive societal impact can be achieved. But what you may ask is the big, hairy, audacious problem that we're trying to solve here. Well, we know, all of us know that we only have 9 years left to meet the SDGs. And a recent report produced by the Sustainable Development Goals Center for Africa states that remittances, official development assistance, or ODA, and other portfolio flows to Africa have taken a nosedive and are likely to remain subdued throughout 2021. The same report points out that the financial gap for SDGs is expected to widen, increasing fiscal vulnerability on African governments. It's estimated that the continent needs between $500 billion to anywhere between 500 billion to 1.2 trillion annually to meet the SDG financing gap. Yet, 1 in 3 sub-Saharan countries cannot raise enough revenues to meet basic state functions. Now, these numbers, I'm sure, are not surprising to any of you on the call today, but we like to often start our presentations, our webinars with that particular statement, just to reinforce really the kind of problem that we're facing, and make it clear that this is something that is very urgent, and we all need to be thinking about it. To meet the SDGs, Africa needs to urgently and strategically crowd in private sector funds from the global capital markets that are sitting on something like $250 trillion, and the financial markets that are valued at $320 trillion. But for us to attract and secure private capital from these sectors to the tune of 1.2 trillion per year, we really need to create improved collaboration between providers of debt, equity, and grants, what we call at AVPA the continuum of capital. So AVPA is a platform that offers the opportunity for diverse types of investors, anywhere from foundations, family offices, corporates, government agencies, venture capitalists, DFIs, international donors, etc., to unite and work together to address the SDGs, the financing gap.
Nancy, your slides are not changing.
Yeah.
Your slides are not changing on our screens.
Oh, sorry.
So please, yeah. Thank
you. Sorry about that. To address the SDGs in a very strategic and impactful way. So actually, this is the second slide, Frank. So this slide shows you our international network, our sister organizations that include EVPA in Europe, AVPN in Southeast Asia, and Latimpacto in South America. So this growing movement allows AVPA to connect African social investors to their global peers, and share best practices with a view to accelerating learning and progress towards our SDGs. This next slide gives you an idea of how we define social investors, the box on the right. We define social investors as organizations or individuals deploying capital and seeking social returns with varying expectations of financial returns. So from a supply side, we embrace philanthropy, impact investment, and socially responsible investment. These are organizations or individuals that look for impact first or finance first in their deployment strategies, and they use different types of approaches to be able to meet those goals. So like I said before, grants, debt, and equity. And we are big proponents of seeing how we can also apply blended finance to drive increased flow of capital into social investments, including non-financial capital. On the demand side, the ultimate target is to see how we can drive capital towards non-profits, social enterprises, and sustainable businesses. Next on this slide is our strategic goals. The first being unpacking and creating real understanding around the development financing gap that Africa is facing. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough capital on the continent from traditional sources, whether that's aid, government revenue, or remittances. Number two is enhancing investor education for domestic institutional investors, because this innovative financing space, while it's not new on the continent, it's also not widely understood or embraced by a large cross-section of players. So right now we believe believe it or not, we found out that on the continent, there's only one organization, one institution that's actually providing innovative financing training, and that's the University of Cape Town Bertha Center, which means our options really, if people want to learn more about this space, are to go to institutions like Cambridge, Duke, Oxford, or Stanford to get the training needed. Our goal as ABPA is to make sure Africa has thousands of innovative financing professionals by pooling together a group of 20 to 30 Pan-African universities and business schools across the continent, and creating an association of innovative financing centers of excellence. So that's something that we are looking into, speaking to a few institutions across the continent. Number 3, championing great grant making, which is about building more catalytic capital that will help attract and de-risk private capital. This goal is also about helping grant makers by providing them with the knowledge, tools, and opportunities that will help them deploy grants with a more catalytic approach. And the last one, connecting social actors, as we're doing today, so that we can learn from each other, but more importantly, increase and strengthen collaboration, which with a view to scaling innovative solutions. And I think we've all seen with COVID-19 how important it is for us to collaborate around social issues. So just to recap, our goal 2 and 3, those are 2 areas that we are currently seeking supporters. If any of you on the call today would like to help us to achieve those 2 goals, we'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about that. At this point, I'd like to now turn to our donors, those who have donated specifically to putting this report together. I want to thank them: Rockefeller Foundation, Social Capital Foundation, and I think Maria is on this call today. Welcome, Maria. She's from Social Capital Foundation, and United States African Development Fund. These are our major donors for this particular study, and then one anonymous donor who obviously didn't want to be mentioned here today, but thank you to all of them. And we also want to thank Manu Chandaria, who is a big supporter and has given us ABPA funds to launch this organization. So thank you very much to all our donors who are on the call. If I haven't mentioned anybody else, forgive me, but thank you very much. Now I'd like to hand over to Rachel Keeler. She is our Value Hub Director, and she has been the lead on this particular project. At some point in today's presentation, you'll also hear from our CEO, Dr. Frank Aswani. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you all here. And as Nancy said, we're really excited to dive into this research with you. So just a bit of background on how we came to this research, sort of the genesis of the study that we would like to repeat every 2 or 3 years. As Nancy said, it really sits within ABPA's view of the market, which is impact-oriented and outcome-oriented. So, if we look at what is our ultimate goal, we can frame that well within the SDGs and work back from there and say, okay, there are many different types of investors in the market who are having an impact on these goals, and how can we promote collaboration amongst them to achieve significant progress towards each of these goals. And so when you look at across Africa, we really have made some significant progress on some of the SDGs, specifically climate action is going very well. A lot of African countries have made very good progress in climate action, as well as responsible consumption and production. But really stagnating or lagging behind in many of the SDGs, which is not good to see. So, important SDGs like zero hunger and health and well-being. And we really need to find a way to make more progress towards the SDGs, and not just in the major markets, not just in Kenya, but in every country in East Africa. We need to be seeing movement forward on the SDGs. And so the big question that we're asking with the landscape study is, where can we go together? What are social investors already doing in each of these areas? How can we promote collaboration amongst them? Next slide, Nancy. Did I lose Nancy? So when we look at, as Nancy mentioned, the financing for the SDGs, there is a huge gap. Traditional sources of funding, as we all know, aid, a lot of countries in Africa have been moving away from official development assistance. It's also in flux and insufficient, and there's been a lot of changes in donor countries in recent years and in aid agencies themselves. That's not going to be a source of capital that increases over the years, but will probably continue to decrease. And so, even looking at FDI, there's a huge gap in the market for funding for these social causes. Governments are also not able to fund SDGs on their own. Limited tax revenue and excessive borrowing has really constrained public spending on development goals. So that's why we've seen very strongly in recent years the move toward more private finance for social and environmental causes. And what we are looking at in this report is sort of how can we promote more of that and more of a blended approach to that from many different investors. Next slide. So the question is, what can all you social investors do about these problems? We want to have an understanding of what you're already doing and what we can promote, what's next. So the report, the landscape report, maps social investors across East Africa in all these different categories. So looking at foundations, family offices, corporate social investors, impact investing funds, private equity funds, venture capital funds who are promoting in impact-related sectors, as well as incubators and accelerators. There's such a diversity of different types of social investors who are active across the region. So we wanted to begin to map, what are the capital pools that are held by each of those investor categories. Obviously, when you're looking at such a huge space, including development finance institutions, bilateral, multilateral donors, there's data available comprehensively on some of those actors and not so much on others. So we've tried to start to set a baseline for data collection on types of social investors that are less covered traditionally, like foundations and corporates and family offices and individual philanthropists, high net worth individuals. But of course, the data that is in this report across that broad spectrum is not comprehensive, but we wanted to start to get an idea for how those capital pools compare to each other. And also not just how much money is being deployed by these different investors, but where is it going? So, and through what kind of investment strategies? Who is deploying via innovative finance structures? What kind of partnerships are we seeing? Are we deploying into major cities, into different countries, investment stages, different sectors? Are there SDGs that are getting more attention from investors than others? So we really tried to create a baseline understanding for this. And then we also look a bit at demand. How does that supply of capital stack up against demand? And what is the enabling environment for social investment? And then we conclude the study by talking about recommendations for fostering sector growth, and also just we keep coming back to this theme of collaboration. More collaboration, more blended finance, more innovative finance, more partnerships across borders, so that we can start to address these SDG financing gaps. We can go forward. Next slide. So just to take you through the high level highlights before we hand over to IntelliCap of what we found. As Nancy mentioned earlier, we found over 820 investors working across the continent. You can go forward, Nancy. Over 300 of those investing in East Africa, more than any other region. There has been a flourishing impact investing space and philanthropic space. Can you go back a slide, please, Nancy? In East Africa for many years. For this study, we looked at the last decade, the last 10 years or so, and you've really seen a growth in activity over that time. We looked at these 6 countries. We did a deep dive into Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, and a high-level review in Rwanda, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, finding really a strong spread across countries, more so than in some of the other regions where you find concentration in a single major market. You see a lot of activity, obviously in Kenya, but also in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, and really growing activity in Ethiopia as well. So that was exciting to see. East Africa is really dominated more so than other regions by sustainability aligned fund managers. And so this is your private fund managers, private equity, venture capital, incubators, accelerators, private debt funds who are investing, deploying capital into sectors that are aligned with the SDGs. So I'm sure you all know that there are many, many funds like that active across East Africa. But we also see the social investment space being driven by highly active corporate social investors. So, people like Safaricom Foundation in Kenya, which is also a supporter of AVPA, Equity Bank, the banks have a lot of foundation activities across the region, and other corporate social investors, both based within and outside of the region, that are driving philanthropic, but also impact investment activities. So that's exciting to see. And I think that sort of leadership that is being put out by the corporates to be socially responsible and to invest back in their communities is really important to the social investment space, and to providing partners, local partners for international investors who might want to break into different markets. We see a lot sort of less public activity by individual philanthropists and family offices, but we do see leadership by very important family offices like the Chandaryas. So that is exciting to see in the East Africa region as well. We can go to the next slide, Nancy. There we go. So in terms of these pools of capital, we do see a diversity. We've seen this huge rise in impact investment, but really the space is still extremely dominated in terms of the volume of capital by bilateral, multilateral donors and DFIs. They do deploy the largest amount of capital into the region, but we see growth in other areas. So, we do see growth, as I said, amongst corporates, both regionally headquartered and corporates coming from other continents. We see large volumes coming into East Africa from North American corporates and foundations specifically. But like I said, starting to see more activity by family foundations, and we hope to see more as we track these trends over time in the coming years. Next slide. So that some of the trends, like I said, when we looked at individual philanthropy across the different African regions, we found that it is much more private in East Africa than in West Africa, for example, or Southern Africa. It's largely unstructured. We're starting to see some family offices, but there's scope for a lot more, especially if some of the tax incentives and regulatory issues can be worked out in a lot of East African countries. But what we do see in East Africa is really strong philanthropy networks and forums that have been established and been growing and supporting the sector for many years. So it's great to have that bit of network and infrastructure support in the region. As I said, we see corporate foundations as really important actors in this space, deploying grants, also starting venture funds and establishing partnerships with their international peers as well. We see really active collaboration by the Kenyan government, especially with social investors and supporting the social investment sector, but a lot of space for more government support and collaboration. Because in many countries, you see that governments are working actively in spaces that that investors, private investors, are also active in, but just working independently and not collaborating. So we think that there's space, especially in areas like gender lens investment and support for women and girls and for youth, which seem to be very important spaces for governments as well. Angel investment gaining momentum with broad engagement. A lot of angel investors are not even high net worth individuals. A lot of them are professionals who want to give back to their space, invest in the sectors that they have learned themselves by engaging in business. So that's exciting to see. A large number of blended finance transactions in East Africa, and diaspora remittances as an important social source of social investment capital. We're really excited to start to see diaspora bonds coming up in countries like Kenya and Rwanda, and because the scale of remittances is huge compared to a lot of other pools of social investment capital. And it's been, an important part of social investment in Africa for a long time, just in, sort of more family to family and friend to friend in informal ways. But to start to see that capital being structured is really exciting. Sorry, Manu says I need to speak louder. We're really excited to see a vibrant social enterprise space. We don't have to tell you about the social enterprises in East Africa, but something that a lot of people have raised recently is the significant proportion of expatriate founded and led enterprises that receive more social investment than locally founded enterprises. This is a specifically East African phenomenon. Interestingly, it's far more prominent in East Africa than it is in West or Southern Africa. So that's something that, as a region, I think we need to look more closely at. Lack of coherent policy and regulation specific to philanthropy, social enterprises, and impact investment. The reports provide a lot of detailed information about sort of what policy and regulation investors are dealing with. When you go to register a social enterprise or looking for, clear policy around taxation, and there's a lot that can be done in that space to promote the sector. And so, obviously the reports they cover a lot of ground, and, whichever area is interesting to your work, you can sort of dive into that specific area and find a lot of really useful information. So I will hand over now to Rachel Wangari from IntelliCap. Their research team did a fantastic job with these reports, and it's been great working with them, and she will provide you more of the detailed highlights from the study. So thank you, everyone. And Rachel, don't forget to talk louder than I did.
Thank you, Rachel. Nancy, I'd request you stop sharing your screen so that I can put mine up.
There you go, Rachel. I stopped sharing. You want to put yours?
Yes. Okay, great. So I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us, and some of you really helped us during our research phase by providing your time and also your insights as we were trying to really build this report. We were looking at various stakeholders, at various social capital providers, and thus really your insights have helped us draw the insights that we are presenting. So I'll take you through some of the findings that we found across various social capital provider categories, and also a high-level assessment of the demand insights, and as well as the ecosystems insights that we found. In this report and this research, we had a high focus on the social investor categories, and thus you will realize that you put more insights around those. So just starting from the donors, and the idea was for us to see what are the investment strategies or the focus areas for each of the investor category, and see how that impacts the overall ecosystem in a way for us to also identify gaps. So just looking at donors continue to play a key role in solving development challenges across the East African countries that we focus at. Just looking at the contribution of ODA to central government expense, it's more than 50% in 3 of these countries, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, slightly less in Kenya and South Sudan. And basically what this means is that any changes in the ODA have a significant impact on the social investment and performance of development sectors. And that's a high need to rethink on strategies to really mobilize private sector capital, as well as philanthropy capital that is there in the region. So just looking at the sectors of preference for donors, we saw that donors in East Africa have a high focus in health, agriculture, and education initiatives. This is not much different from the other regions that we looked at, that's East and West, where health really dominated the donor portfolios in all these countries, in all these regions, and agriculture and education was also coming up as prominent sectors of preference for the donors. Again, we've seen donors really moving away from just doing aid and grants, but also focusing on really building the entrepreneurial and social investment ecosystem through provision of catalytic TA funds, working with the DFIs and with sustainability aligned fund managers to put more funds in terms of TA to social enterprises and impact businesses. Moving to DFI investments, so our research mapped 6.6 billion USD that was deployed to East Africa by DFIs, and DFIs really remain key source of capital, of social investment capital in the region. And what we saw is that the investment is highly concentrated in terms of sectors and geographies. We saw that the top 3 sectors, financial services, energy, and agriculture, contributed about 78% of the portfolio. So you see a high skew towards these 3 key sectors. Again, this is something similar that we saw in the other regions where DFIs really prefer to invest in these 3 top sectors. Again, just looking at the split between the top 3 sectors, a high preference for financial services and energy compared to agriculture. What we also saw is Kenya remains the preferred destination for DFI capital, accounting for about 46% of the DFI portfolio. We did see an increase in preference for Ethiopia, accounting for 15%, followed by Tanzania and Uganda. And for DFI, what we got from the DFIs that we spoke to was that the stability of the economy and the size of the economy really does matter in when they are deciding to put in capital. Debt we identified has been the common instrument, with DFIs in the region really preferring to invest through direct investments into businesses, similar to West Africa, but in Southern Africa, we identified that DFIs are moving more towards indirect investments working through funds. Again, we also sought to identify how TA was viewed by DFIs and whether this was an integral part of their deals. And yes, most of the DFIs that we spoke to, and just looking through the reports, we did identify that TA is actually a big consideration for investment, and this is mostly provided post-investment, as and very few TA funds are going to pre-investment support. So looking at sustainability aligned fund managers, what Rachel described as the PE, VCs, incubators, accelerators, blended funds, we saw that while they have a focus on top 3 sectors. These are relatively well balanced. Again, the sectors are energy, financial services, and interesting to see healthcare featuring as a top sector in East Africa compared to the West and Southern Africa. Investments, again, are highly concentrated geographically, with Kenya accounting for 70% of the SFM portfolio, which was followed by Uganda, still very low. But what was interestingly to note was that Rwanda overtook Tanzania and Ethiopia in terms of the total deal value that flowed into the country. And this was again attributed to good business environment and a very supporting environment for entrepreneurship that is really boosting growth of enterprises in the country. Just looking at the deal sizes, this was about 6.7 million, the average deal size. We witnessed a large gap in the missing middle with a dip in the number of deals that were deployed between the 500K and 1 million USD ticket size. Again, we really did explore the TA, the role of TA and the importance of TA in SFM investments. And most of the SFMs that we engaged did acknowledge that TA is crucial for their investments, and they do work with TA providers to really provide post-investment support to the businesses that they are investing in. And interestingly, we also saw some SFMs that are adopting a co-financing model where they fund about 50% of the TA and the business funds the other 50. And this is really to motivate the business to also be invested in the TA and not just focus on the financial investment that is coming in. On the sources of funds, SFMs, we saw primarily rely on international funding for investment and technical assistance, really again raising the question on the role of local capital in supporting enterprises through SFMs. We also took an analysis of the corporates and just to see what they're doing, their sectors of preference, how they're deploying their funds. And as Rachel mentioned, so corporates in East Africa really are coming out strongly, and particularly in the banking sector, where they are working through their operating foundations to implement large-scale and long-term projects, and with a high focus on education and economic empowerment and entrepreneurship, as well as health. And we saw a significant proportion of the CSIs, the corporate foundations, also working with social enterprises, with 11% of the CSI funds deployed through social enterprises. So this is through the impact funds that have been, for example, established by the corporates like the Spark Venture by Safaricom, among others. And we also saw a significant, again, of this proportion, a significant amount of these funds deployed through academic and research institutions with a push towards education. And this is, for example, the work that Equity Bank is doing with the Wings to Fly program. CSIs are also working to boost the social investment and entrepreneurship industry through incubation and acceleration programs, something close to what Standard Chartered Bank is doing with their accelerator program that they launched recently. We try to compare this with the CSI activities by North American Foundation, and the focus on North American was because these foundations activities are more pronounced in the region, and the data was also more accessible compared to the other foundations. And we do acknowledge that this is an area that needs further research, particularly looking at the European and the Latin American as well as Asia foundations' role in the social investment space. So the North American Foundation have a large focus on entrepreneurship and economic development, and this can be attributed to large CSI, large projects by foundations such as the MasterCard Foundation that has been doing a lot of work supporting KCB and KCB Foundation, as well as Equity Foundation and other foundations in the region. Most of these North American foundations, however, are working through NGOs and governments, but most of them have also been moving to impact investments, where they are deploying grants as well as debt investments into early stage enterprises. Again, something we saw in the region is the collaboration between the international foundations as well as the regional foundation, and the kind of impact that is creating. We saw, for example, the collaboration between MasterCard and KCB Foundation, as well as with Equity Foundation, to scale up some of the entrepreneurship programs that the foundations are running. Just looking at the regional family foundations, and Rachel did mention earlier, we really did see, we saw that the activities remain highly private in comparison to West and Southern Africa, where we were able to map a lot of activities that were being undertaken by family foundations. But nonetheless, we did identify some family foundations that are active and were able to map the trends in terms of the sector preference and how they are deploying their funds as well. A high concentration on education and entrepreneurship and health sectors is what we saw from the regional family foundation. And most of them are working through the NGOs as well as academia and research, who research institutions who are really the main recipients. One of the interesting things we noted was on the transaction size. So the average transaction size was about 270K US dollars, compared to about 10 million in a similar size for Southern and West Africa. So really just looking at that difference is quite immense. And also even comparing with the North American Family Foundation, the transaction size is almost 4 times less the North American Family Foundation. Just comparing again with the other two regions, we saw that the Regional Family Foundation had higher ticket sizes compared to the North American Family Foundations that were active in those two regions. Interesting to also note that Regional Family Foundation are also moving from just grant-based support to also building the ecosystem and also even undertaking impact investment. And an example is Mojoji Foundation, and also our very own Chandaria, that is supporting incubation of enterprises through the Chandaria Business Incubation Center at based in Kenyatta University. North American Foundation, their main focus in terms of sectors have been on healthcare, agriculture, and energy. Again, the funding is largely dominated by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and this could explain the skew towards healthcare, because BMGF is highly focused on the health sector. We also tried to map the trends when it came to angel investing, just looking at what sectors they are looking at and what kind of investments they are making. And we did see that angel investment is gaining momentum, and with a lot of angel networks established in the last 3 to 4 years, we're able to map about 40 angel investment networks that are already operating across the focus countries. What we saw was that angels have a high focus on sectors not strongly aligned to SDGs, with 56% of the angel investments that we mapped going to these sectors. And this, from the interviews, what we got was that it's because these sectors offer higher financial returns compared to the SDG sectors, although there's an increase in investment towards tech-based SDG-aligned enterprises, like in the fintech and health tech, agri-tech enterprises. Most of these investments were made in Kenya, which accounted for 59% of the identified investments. And in terms of transaction size, this we saw this was around 350K USD, and investments were mainly done in form of equity and into early stage and growing businesses. So faith-based and diaspora are two key sources of social capital that we identified. A lot more still needs to be done in terms of research, as well as creating partnership and engagement frameworks for these sources of capital. What we saw is that faith-based, of course, is deeply rooted in our communities, given the religion and strong focus on culture, religious culture in our communities. And most of the faith-based organizations have focused on health, education, water, and economic empowerment, as well as emergency relief initiatives. To what extent is what we need to identify as proposed in the next research. We saw a lot of diaspora remittances coming to the region, particularly in Kenya as well as Uganda, but this remains highly unstructured, and there is room for more innovative ways to leverage the diaspora funds. But interestingly to mention that we saw some diaspora bonds coming up, like the Rwanda affordable housing bond that was launched in 2019, and the plans for Kenya to leverage a diaspora bond to raise funds for the Big Four agenda. So these are just some insights on what we found on the demand side. And on the demand side, we were looking at social enterprises, impact businesses, and also the nonprofits. One of the key things that came out was the missing middle challenge, which is quite known out there, where SMEs have a challenge in accessing finance, and which was also reiterated by our research that showed the dip in deals in the ticket sizes between 500K and 1 million. There's also the challenge of capital flow into the same enterprises, where the top 10 companies in the region attracted over 69% of the total funding by SFMs, with 20% of the deals made in these companies. So these companies are receiving most of the funding and in higher ticket sizes when you compare to the other little known enterprises that are coming up. Again, as Rachel mentioned earlier, a high preference for expert-founded businesses really came out strongly during our assessment of the demand side, where a research that was conducted identified that enterprises managed and founded by local founders in Kenya, for example, secured 60% of the total VC funding, while expert-founded startups received 88%. So quite a big difference in terms of where the funding is flowing when you look at the owners of the businesses. Also, less capital flowing to women businesses. Again, that's a big challenge that is there in the region. While more and more women owned and led businesses are coming up, less capital remains to flow in these businesses because of various challenges that are facing the women-led businesses. When looking at nonprofits, we really did identify also challenges that are facing nonprofits. Most of them rely exclusively on funding from international sources, from the donors and from the international foundations. And most of this funding is restricted to programs. So they face challenges when it comes to funds for capacity development. So with the dwindling funds from international sources, as well as the changing strategies where most of the grant makers are shifting towards impact investment, then nonprofits are left at a situation where they need to rethink their funding strategies, and also come up with innovative ways of funding or raising revenue. And thus we identify the role of venture philanthropy and other innovative financing models to leverage local capital and improve the efficiency of nonprofits in a bid to make them more sustainable. So we also did look at the enabling environment for social investments, where we looked at policy and also the ecosystem support. So looking at policy, a lot still needs to be done with the region lacking overarching frameworks for guiding social investments. We know there are activities already ongoing, for example, with the startup bill in Kenya as well as in Rwanda, but these are yet to be implemented, and thus there's a lot of challenges facing the players in the market. Looking at the ecosystem support from incubators, accelerators, networks, and the knowledge side. On the incubators, we did see, yes, there's a lot of incubation activities happening, but this is mainly concentrated in Kenya, where most of the incubators are at. And even in Kenya, most of this is in the major cities. So you'd find a lot of incubators in Nairobi, Mombasa and Kisumu. Kisumu is also picking up. But overall, reaching enterprises who are in the rural areas in tier 2 cities is quite a big challenge. Sustainability of these incubators also came up as a big problem, because most of them rely on grants and donations from the donors and international foundations, and don't have their own revenue generating mechanisms. We also identified that most are sector agnostic and thus offer generic support to enterprises. While this would work in the business side, when it comes to applying the technical skills that are needed to really support the enterprises grow or scale their businesses, then that becomes a challenge. When we looked at accelerators and capacity builders, and this is a common challenge that we identified across all the regions. Again, this remains a key challenge where businesses, SMEs, are not able to afford acceleration and TA services because the costs are high, and whenever they are able to be linked to TA and accelerators, this is mainly donor or international foundation driven. So really there is a need for a way to come up with affordable TA services for growing businesses. Networks and platforms, so we did identify that there's a growth in the networks and platforms that are focused on social investment, on impact investments, as well as on entrepreneurship. And most of these operate across the region, so they're able to focus on enterprises in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, or on investors and bring them together. Knowledge and research, this is one of the big challenge that we also faced even as we were doing the research. The lack of data and information, particularly when it comes to philanthropy, which is highly private, as well as corporate and faith-based giving, is a big challenge. And few organizations are focused on putting this data together and in an accessible manner. So we also did look at philanthropy forums, networks, and organizations, and these are existing in the region. And most of them were regional based and also trying to promote the growth of philanthropy in the region. Strategic philanthropy advisors. This was something we found very unique to Southern Africa, where they are specialized ecosystem support organizations that are working with individual as well as corporate organizations to strategically mobilize and deploy their funds. And this is really boosting the growth of corporate giving as well as individual philanthropy in the region. So we also looked at impact measurement and management and how this is viewed by different investors. This came out as a key factor of DFI as well as SFM investments. Some of the local players like the CSIs as well as the family foundation are also doing their own impact measurement, but this is not based on global frameworks, and thus impact data across the different family foundations or CSIs is hard to compare. So I'll hand it over to Frank to move us to the next level, which is just discussing the recommendations and the areas for future research based on the research findings.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for your time. Please, we are getting to the end of the formal part of the presentation. If I can have you kind of tee up your questions, either put them in the chat box, or if you feel you strongly need to ask a question, we'll enable you to unmute yourself and pose your question. But just in terms of the two last slides on the study, looking at firstly the recommendations to coming out of the study to support the growth of the social investment ecosystem. The first one there is we need to build and promote the use of catalytic capital and the blended finance on the continent, because we are heavily lacking in capital in the social development space. The catalytic capital will be essential in helping us de-risk social investments and crowding private sector capital. So it's important that, especially for the grant makers on this call, is to start thinking about how they could potentially diversify the investment strategy away from just giving out all their money as pure grants, but also looking at how they can invest alongside other mainstream private capital investors. And that's a program that AVP would be very happy to support in building the capacity of grant makers in this innovative financing space. The second thing is something that's been a common theme for the last couple of months, the need for collaboration, but especially in programs that are gender sensitive and where we're also touching the youth. Number three is what's come across as a very common thing across the three regional reports is if we've got to have more Africans playing in this space, we need to improve our competence, and there is need for innovative financing training programs across the continent. But also we are hampered by the fact that we have very limited number of institutions that can actually offer this kind of training. As Nancy mentioned in the beginning, it's only University of Cape Town that currently has an innovative financing program on the continent. So what AVP is trying to do, we want to build a critical mass of innovative financing institutions on the continent, and we'll be very happy to partner with people who want to help us build that local capacity in country. The number four is about philanthropy advisors to enable focused mobilization and deployment. We've seen the success of philanthropy advisors in South Africa, and these are advisors who work from within institutions and from outside institutions to support, especially individual givers or philanthropists, to be more strategic with their own giving. And they've been a huge success, and it's something the rest of the continent could borrow from Southern Africa, and South Africa specifically. Number five, it's about supporting the development of alternative funding models for nonprofits. Generally, we're seeing that funding to nonprofits is shrinking across the continent. It's consistent across everywhere. And as you know, we've built a huge dependency on aid and grant giving for nonprofits to survive. This is really time for nonprofits to think differently about how they can mobilize capital. So if you sit on a board of a nonprofit or you're part of a nonprofit, I think this is a time for you to really be looking at what you could do differently. Number six, about the regulatory framework. Once again, we've seen some emerging trends that are exciting about the startup acts that have been implemented in Tunisia, Senegal, and Rwanda. But there's need for more countries to adopt the startup acts that have been implemented in those countries to enable much more easy setting up of new businesses. And also borrow from countries like South Africa on just the CSI policies in trying to incentivize more giving into this space. We're also seeing that Kenya has a social entrepreneurship policy that's in motion, and South Africa has just started the process of developing one. So there's slowly but surely changes happening on the continent from a policy perspective. But we recognize that we are also slightly behind the rest of the world. So one of the things that AVPA will be working hard to do is to help connect African policymakers with their peers in Asia and Europe and Latin America to see what we can learn from lessons learned in enhancing the social investment space in those parts of the world. TA funding has been discussed at length. I think we need to look at how we can do that, especially in support of the early stage. Most of it, as you heard, has been, especially from the DFIs, goes to the post investment space. I think we need to do quite a bit more, not just for TA, but for general capital for early stage support of businesses. Data and knowledge tools is a no-brainer that we need to keep doing because it informs decision, it informs policy, it informs direction, and lowering the cost of matchmaking and conducting due diligence. So one of the tools that we are rolling out at AVPA is our deal share platform that is designed to exactly do that, to see how we can reduce not just the time, but the cost of matchmaking and due diligence. And please go to our website and check out the work we're doing. We are rolling out weekly demonstration on our deal share platform every Wednesday at 4 p.m. East Africa time. You can join one of the sessions and get to learn more about our deal share platform. If you go to our events page, you will find a sign up section where you can sign up for those demonstration sessions. So please join us as we roll out the deal share platform. We're recruiting pilot partners as we speak. So any of you who are social investors and looking to either attract more capital into your existing social investments for growth, exit, or scale, or you're an investor looking for deal flow, that deal share platform will be of great use to you. Lastly, we want to look at what the study has shown us in terms of potential areas of future research. And as Rachel Keeler mentioned, we plan to repeat the study every 2 to 3 years, subject to funding availability, but also unpack a few more very nuanced areas from the study. So sectoral performance of blended finance and catalytic financing structures. As you may all know, this whole space of innovative financing gives us the option of having very bespoke structuring and designs of deals. But we need to look at how do these perform at a sectoral level, looking especially at the key sectors on the region. Blended and innovative financing for smaller transactions, whereas East Africa is leading in terms of the blended finance transactions done. A lot of them are for very big infrastructural projects. We need to see how do we not only improve the capabilities of the smaller investors in playing in this innovative financing space, but how do we also make it work? How do we make smaller transactions cost effective? And a lot of people are looking into this space at the moment. Benchmarking, analysis of corp CSI policies, and this is looking at what we can learn from other regions and other countries. The opportunity within the diaspora is big, and we need to see how we can tap into it as more people are figuring out how to make most of the money that's sent from our brothers and sisters living out of the country. Strategic collaboration with faith-based giving. Those of us who are maybe 40 and above grew up with a lot of faith-based influence in our lives, from mission hospitals to mission schools. And I think there's something that the modern churches especially could do to support small young people, small and medium enterprises and young people getting entrepreneurship by providing some high-risk capital to get them started. So there's definitely something for people, in the current phase where churches are probably the biggest recipients of money from Africans at the moment. And I think they can find a more creative economic way of giving back. Data gathering, I think we've spoken about that in terms of using tools from surveys and other options. TA models for local entrepreneurs, I think we need to unpack that a bit more. Case studies for successful models, especially looking at what grant makers are able to do with their capital and unlock more private sector capital, where this is a really exciting space, really growing. The Asians have really picked this up. We're also very willing as AVPA to partner with our Asian sister network to bring into the African space organizations that have made this transition, so we can learn from them and not necessarily have to start everything from scratch. And lastly, demand-side research, where we engage with social entrepreneurs and NGOs to understand how their changing needs can be met by the capital available. So that's kind of the presentation of the study. We'd love to get some questions from you. So if you feel very strongly you want to voice your question, please unmute yourself and please ask a question. But what we'll do is that we'll start with a question from Maurice Omondi, who asks, how can we influence local philanthropists to support social enterprises? Rachel Wangari, do you have a view on that?
I think one of the things that was really coming out is really the engagement as well as education on social enterprise and the role it plays in the ecosystem, because what we are getting from the philanthropists is what they know. So they just know working with NGOs and just giving donations and grants. But really deliberate engagement and training and educating them on venture philanthropy and all these new concepts that really drive their fund to be deployed in more sustainable manner is quite crucial, and I think is one of the ways where we can be able to unlock this capital.
I think to add to Rachel Wangari's comments, part of what we want to do with investor education is to also talk about things like tailored financing. What kind of financing is good for the different stages of life cycle of a business, and how do they not necessarily have to deploy the capital themselves, but partner with other investors to make sure that these enterprises are getting the right type of capital with the right kind of non-financial support as well at the right time. So there is big opportunities for increased collaboration with other types of mainstream investors or private investors that we have in the ecosystem. Is there anyone who feels they have a question? They can unmute themselves and ask. Or was the report that clearly presented? It's very unlike East Africans to be quiet. We had a lot of questions from Southern Africans, so I'm assuming we would have a few more from East Africans. Rachel, do you want to make a comment about the relative trends we saw when you compare especially things like donor funding in East, West, and Southern Africa? Because there's some interesting observations there the report threw out as that might be worth people just getting to know how the regions differ in terms of especially donor flows. And how we can explain the differences at an interregional level.
Frank, I can re-emphasize that around donor flows. I think East Africa has for sure received the highest donor flow from compared to West and Southern Africa. And what we saw and what I mentioned is really the importance of aid and ODA to the countries, just looking at what proportion it contributes to the government expense. This is relatively lower in Southern Africa, where it was less than 5% for the key economies like South Africa and Angola. So when you compare this to the dependency on aid in East Africa, there is really a lot of need to work on our local capital sources, the government as well as the private sector, because just looking at the trends on the donor trends and the aid declining, that means there'll be an underserved in terms of the sectors that have attracted a lot of donor flow. So a lot of sensitization and need to leverage local capital and to direct this towards these donor focused sectors like health and education.
Thank you, Rachel. Anyone else with a question? Anyone else who wants to unmute and ask a question?
I was just going to point out, Frank, that there are questions. There's one here for Rachel also. Is there funding available for the smaller ticket sizes below $500,000 US? What are your findings on that?
Nancy, I think Kanika gave a response to that, but we did see that, yes. Sorry, Nancy. Yes, we did see, yes, SFMs are deploying to this. And remember, SFMs are covering incubators and accelerators. So incubators and accelerators have focused on giving grant in that ticket sizes, but also donors and foundations that are supporting these incubators have also been the ones that are focused on those small ticket sizes.
Thank you. I think Maurice has a follow-up question to his earlier one about philanthropy. He says, as a follow-up, how can one identify the local philanthropists? I'm doing a study in the same, but stuck in getting respondents. Are there networks with databases and that are easily to find?
Maurice, I have to say, yes, that's a challenge there, but they are networks that are there. So like East Africa Philanthropy Network, you'd be able to identify the local philanthropists there, and they've classified what they define as philanthropy. So they're looking at corporates, they're looking at family foundations, they're looking at community foundations. So I think engaging with such networks would give you access to a wider network of philanthropies.
And just to add to that, Rachel, this is Karnika. I suppose even AVPA is actively developing its network of venture philanthropists and philanthropists in the region, and a lot of foundations, local foundations and international foundations are working. So I suppose Maurice, again, AVPA will be able to, I'm assuming, Frank, Nancy.
Indeed, Kanika, indeed, yes, we're building a good database. So Maurice, reach out to us offline. We'll see how we can support you through that process. Okay, there is another question here, Rachel. I think this is for you around. You mentioned in the first slides that the SDG climate change related SDGs is, you mentioned in the first slides that the climate change related SDGs is relatively well addressed. Is that across different investment size, also including at the smaller end and missing middle?
Yeah, Frank, thanks, Tatiana. So that is the official SDG ranking that a lot of different data goes into establishing those SDG rankings. That doesn't come from our research, but I think what happens with the climate action SDG is a lot of there have been a huge number of renewable energy infrastructure projects across East Africa and across all of Africa, really. So I think that affects that climate action SDG as well. You see a huge progress in off-grid energy as well. That's clean and renewable in places like East Africa. So that would be at the smaller end of the investment size as opposed to the larger infrastructure projects. I know just from working in climate change investment that there's a lot less investment on the adaptation side, which is often smaller investment sizes. But there is really a huge amount of data that goes into estimating those progress on the SDGs from a lot of different related sectors. So I think it's quite a mix, but you really do see a lot more. It's easier to invest, I think, in climate action than in some other sectors, like in WASH, for example, or in certain areas of agribusiness or education. I think addressing poverty and inequality, we see a lot less ability to invest at a large scale than you see on the climate side. So that's probably attributed to some of that. I hope that answers your question. We've got more questions coming through here. Frank, if you want to tee up a few more.
Yeah. Aziza asks, he's curious to hear more about how to make grantees able to access unrestricted patient capital for innovation with less barriers. Do we have any examples of actionable steps that can be taken? And then he also asks, I know you mentioned less restrictive due diligence processes briefly, so would you love to hear more about that? So I can take the second part of the question. Wangari, do you want to try and answer the first part of the question? So, how do they make, how can grantees be made more appealing for to access unrestricted patient capital for innovation with less barriers?
What we identified and what we are recommending is that need for sort of blending and working across the different providers of capital. So where the donors and the grant providers work to make the grant, work to sort of catalyze the follow-on capital to the businesses. So really working across the different providers of capital and blending that capital. We see it as a way to really bring in more patient capital and drive innovation. Kanika, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add a few points there. More so in terms of some action points that can be taken at the demand side by the enterprises or the grantees themselves. What we have seen is that some things which restrict the access to finance for these grantees, be it the social enterprises or the NGOs, is the informality in the businesses or not having proper financial statements, audited accounts, and so which is a very key requirement when any investor is making an investment, be it any financier is putting money into your businesses, so be it equity investor, be it a donor, or be it a bank. So having proper financial statements, proper governance structures in place is a key requirement which more and more businesses should start following so as for them to becoming more investment ready. The second thing is more at the ecosystem level, that the businesses don't have the knowledge about where they can get the information about the potential investors or potential financiers, and particularly the businesses which are outside of the key cities such as Nairobi or Kampala or Dar es Salaam for that case. They don't know how to approach the investors. Where do they even look for the investors? So that is something which is required at the ecosystem level to create these linkages for the businesses with the investors, create these platforms where the investors and the businesses can come together, they can showcase their businesses, and it can be both online or offline. So yeah, so secondly, there is a need for this sort of things at the ecosystem level to be done more and more.
Thank you. Manu, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, yes. I don't understand the whole issue. We are supposed to discuss about the social business. And I think that there's a lot of information about international money and FDI and whatnot. This is available in any time, whenever you want it. All we require is to find out, are there some classical examples of social business which is being done in the country, which are the examples which can be repeated, and so that the foundations could then follow those type of places where they would like to see and feel comfortable so that they can provide the philanthropic money. FDI and these are 6 years history of Africa. It has very little effect. It does effect, but out of $1, only maybe 25% or 25 cents goes to the really root. Otherwise, everything is just eaten up in Sundays and whatnot. To me, I thought that what we are talking today, or what I joined to hear, social enterprises that are there. We have set up a little company over here to do the social enterprises. And they are manufacturing some good items, and we think that we can certainly support them. But we need some examples where foundations might change over, rather than making grant makers, they turn into supporting some social businesses, which I don't hear anything.
Yeah, Manu, thank you for your question. Let me just clarify what this was about. So the study was set up to look at the very broad flow of capital across multiple sources, the purpose was to open up subsequent. Not to identify what that looks like at the moment, but also identify follow-on opportunities for additional research, but also additional programmatic and collaborative engagement opportunities. So I totally agree with you that we need to see what are the practical things that people can do now. And some of the recommendations actually to build on that is to say, how can we improve the way we deploy capital to small and especially early stage businesses? And some of that work is what AVP will be carrying forward from here. So this was just to give us the evidence base upon which we can build the programmatic inventions to do the stuff you've just mentioned.
Well, I think that let's take an example of MasterCard, KCB, MasterCard, my friend James Mwangi, Equity Bank. At the end of the day, it's the increase of business. There's no more than that. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they are, many a times the money has been given at 2%, 0.5%, 1%, 3%. To give it to the people to really increase the businesses so that they can help themselves. But it has never happened because it's too difficult and too hard. Because even to 2%, the man wants the money back. Now in many startup businesses, money might come back and money might never come back.
Come back, exactly.
So the whole purpose of social businesses was an interest in doing business with also interest that it helps the society. It's not only for interest and my returns. For my return is something else. And once you have a social business, then the returns are also being deployed particularly in an organized manner to support other businesses. But I don't see that discussion. Anyway, what you come out with all the figures and whatnot, these are all available anytime that you want. What is the flow? What has been happening? How it has happened? It does not support the social businesses. What we want to start philanthropists in the country and the groups of people putting together and doing some businesses for social good. It comes social good plus a little bit of profit for them. But that's what the whole idea's purpose was. And not to what the FDI has come for 60 years. It done nothing. So I don't think that, so my way of looking at the whole thing is presentation of something which is immaterial, really. You can get it from any one of the organizations. You go to a number of organizations in the country, it'll give you all the information. So that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking is for how does the philanthropist, how the local and the smaller businesses come up. In Kenya, we started Youth Fund. After that, we created Women Fund. Then we created Uwezo Fund. Nobody knows nothing about what happened to the fund, whether it has produced anything, whether it has returned anything. All these kind of exercises have no meaning overall. It's only meaning for transferring money from A pocket to B pocket. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and Manu, it's a problem across the continent. I totally agree with you.
I know that. I know that.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
I operate in 16 countries. I know that.
Yes,
but the question is that I thought that we will be discussing something which, even if you've got 50 companies or foundations in the country who are willing to turn into, rather than grant making, into social businesses. So it will give some more support to people's work. At the same time, it will create businesses, money, and possibility of growth.
Yeah, and that's where we're going to go with the recommendations from this study. Is okay. We're going to put people together to do exactly that, because we need a different approach to solving that problem. I totally agree with you, and so what you'll see, the program we've spoken about, we're designing, is to exactly pull together this money for greater impact. So how do the different players collaborate differently, deploy their capital differently for greater impact, and not depend on the old models? So that's exactly what we're going to be doing going forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could I just add to that as well? Because I think it's a really good point that you bring up, Manu, and it's something that we see when you start to try to create a bridge from the impact investing space to the philanthropic space. This is exactly probably the biggest barrier is a philanthropist says, why should I put money into this impact investing fund or into this blended finance transaction or into this company that is out to make a profit when I could just give that money directly to someone who needs it and ensure that I understand that direct impact. I think that does come up a lot. And I think to your point, Manu, there are a huge number of social enterprises in East Africa, and the report does look at that from the demand side, that it's a flourishing startup and social enterprise ecosystem. There are so many of these companies out there, and yet there are specific funding trends in terms of how they are getting money and from whom. And I think a lot of those enterprises are getting money from large foundations, donor programs, and Western sources of capital, especially in East Africa. And many of those social enterprises will love to find a local philanthropist who's willing to give them patient capital or willing to give them a grant from a different source than where they normally find that capital. And it's that those communication links don't exist very well. And so what the report also tries to do is start to identify who are the local philanthropists, who are the corporates that are deploying grants in the region, and who are these diverse actors who could be funding these social enterprises in a different way. And once we identify those actors on both sides, how can we promote communication between them and case studies of models for turning sort of traditional grant funding and grant philanthropy into investments in social enterprises. So I think that's absolutely where we want to go from this baseline of understanding, who's who and why are they not talking to each other yet.
So I realize we're out of time, so we'll take one more question. Rachel Wangari, this is for you. Adrian asks, do we have a sense of what is driving the preference for funding expert-founded social enterprise in East Africa? Is it just about, yeah.
So yes, you do mention about connection and networks. Yes, that is coming out as a key challenge that is hindering access to finance for local. But also the view is that most local businesses don't have the business acumen. Most are also not investor ready. And things that Kanika spoke about earlier about the demand side, lack of like financial statements are not in place. Most also don't understand the sophisticated investment terms, and most just know about debt. So really, it's a combination of all these challenges that were brought out as one of the key hindrances to capital flow into local businesses.
Okay, Rachel, thank you so much. And to Intellecap, thank you so much for the work you put into the study. We've been going for an hour and a half, so I want to respect everyone's time, and I'll stop there. I think see this as a beginning of engaging the data that's in the study. What's most important is what we do with the outcomes, the data, information, and recommendations from the study. And we'll be doing a lot more of this into next year. So please stay in touch with us. Thank you so much for your time. The studies can be downloaded on our website. If you go to our website and under the Value Hub, you'll find the landscape study. Please feel free to download the study and give us your thoughts. Let's share with us what your thoughts are. And please, you'll be receiving some communication from us. If you can please add the info@avpa email address .africa to your address book, so we don't get dumped into your junk box. That would be useful. So that would be really, really useful. But thank you so much. And to Kanika and Rachel Wangari, thank you so much for the time you've put into pulling this together for the last couple of months. Nancy and Rachel Killer, thank you for your input into the presentation today. Others, we'll see you guys hopefully in the new year, and have a Merry Christmas if we don't speak again.